The number hit me long before the actual story did. 250,000. That is 250,000 children with no parents, no last names, no birth certificates, and no official records of where they came from or who they belonged to. Between the years of 1854 and 1929, these children were loaded onto trains and shipped across America like freight, distributed to absolute strangers in 47 states. Somehow this massive event remains a mere footnote in our history books rather than a major chapter. I stumbled across this mystery while pulling threads on the destruction of the 1890 census, searching for what else might have vanished during that exact window of time. One gap in the records led to another, which eventually led to a name I had never once encountered in a classroom: the Orphan Trains. This was the largest mass relocation of children in American history, a 75-year program that moved 250,000 human beings across a continent, yet most people today have never even heard of it. That silence alone should bother you, but what bothered me even more was the math behind the narrative. The official story, we are told, goes like this. In the 1850s, eastern cities were completely overwhelmed by waves of immigration. Families poured in from Europe, cramming into dense tenement housing, and when parents succumbed to disease, poverty, or addiction, their children were left to fend for themselves on the streets. New York City alone reportedly had an estimated 10,000 to 30,000 homeless children by 1850. A Yale-educated minister named Charles Loring Brace saw these children sleeping in dark alleyways, forming gangs for survival, and being thrown into adult prisons at ages as young as 5 years old. He decided to act. In 1853, he founded the Children's Aid Society. His solution was simple: take these children out of the corrupting environment of the city, put them on trains, and send them out to wholesome farming families in the Midwest who desperately needed labor and could provide a moral upbringing. The first train left New York on October 1, 1854, carrying 46 children to Michigan, and by the end of that week, every single one had been placed. The program quickly expanded as other organizations joined, including the New York Foundling Hospital, and for more than 7 decades, the trains kept running. To be fair to the official narrative, many children did land in loving homes. 2 orphan train riders even went on to become state governors, Andrew Burke of North Dakota and John Brady of Alaska. A survey from 1910 claimed an 87% success rate, and Charles Loring Brace genuinely believed he was saving lives. I do not dispute that some individuals found a better life. What I dispute is the sheer scale of the operation, the true origin of these children, and the total silence surrounding the parts of this story that simply do not add up. Let us look closely at the numbers. New York City's entire population in 1950 was roughly 500,000. The claim that up to 30,000 of them were homeless children means that anywhere from 2 to 6% of the entire city consisted of parentless minors roaming the streets. By the 1870s, despite dozens of charitable organizations working all the clock, that number of homeless children did not shrink, it grew. The supply of parentless children kept increasing, but where were the parents? Immigration records and ship manifests from this era exist, and they show that Ellis Island processed families arriving together, not unaccompanied minors by the tens of thousands. If these children arrived with families, something happened to those parents after arrival that was so widespread and so thorough that it produced 250,000 children whose origins could never be traced. When you look beyond the borders of the United States, you realize this was not an isolated incident. The British Home Children Program ran during an overlapping window of time, relocating over 100,000 children from the United Kingdom to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa under nearly identical conditions. That brings the total across these parallel programs to more than 350,000 children. They used the same methods, followed the same patterns, and labeled children as orphans, even though records later revealed that 2/3 of the British children had at least one living parent. This is not just a localized symptom of urban poverty, it's a global pattern, and patterns demand explanations. Yet explanations do not come because the records have vanished. The National Orphan Train Complex in Kansas maintains a database of just over 8,000 confirmed riders out of the 250,000. That's a mere 3%. The New York Foundling Hospital, which sent out an estimated 100,000 children on its own, has records that researchers describe as practically non-existent. Many organizations kept no standardized documentation at all. Children were pulled directly off the streets, their names were changed upon placement, and their pasts were effectively wiped clean. Even today, the archives of the primary societies remain heavily restricted. Descendants who reach out for answers are explicitly told they will only receive non-identifying information in the form of a summary letter, with no copies of original documents provided. 97% of these children have records that are missing, sealed, or destroyed, occurring in a nation that was simultaneously building the most comprehensive bureaucratic census system in the world. This brings us back to the 1890 census, the most detailed population survey the United States had ever conducted up to that point. It was designed to capture a complete snapshot of a nation of 63 million people during the absolute peak of the orphan train era, documenting exactly where these children were living and whether their origins matched any verifiable immigration records. That census was entirely lost. A fire in 1921 in the basement of the Commerce Department building damaged the documents, but instead of salvaging what remained, the government left the records to deteriorate in a warehouse for 12 years. In 1932, the surviving schedules were quietly authorized for complete destruction. No backup copies had been made at local offices. The single most valuable genealogical tool for tracking this massive demographic shift was wiped out completely. The physical reality of how these children were distributed is perhaps the most unsettling part of the history. When a train arrived at a destination town, advance flyers had already been posted in local newspapers advertising that homes were wanted for children. The minors were marched into local courthouses, opera houses, or railroad platforms and put on a physical stage. They were made to stand in lines, sing songs, and give brief performances while townspeople inspected them. Historical accounts detail how prospective guardians would prod the children, feeling their muscles and checking their teeth to judge their health and age. Siblings were routinely separated on the spot, watching each other get chosen by different families, never to see one another again. The very phrase we use today, "put up for adoption," originates from this literal practice of placing children up on wooden platforms for public selection. Once chosen, the erasure of their identity was completed. They were forbidden from contacting their past, told their old lives no longer existed, and their legal documents frequently used the word indenture, the legal framework for contracted servitude, rather than adoption. This was a demand for agricultural labor, and if a child was deemed too small for farm work, they were often rejected and placed back on the train to ride to the next town. At the time, observers saw exactly what was happening. Abolitionists openly compared these platform displays to slave auctions, and religious leaders publicly accused the organizing societies of systematically taking immigrant children to strip them of their heritage. Yet the trains kept running, and their peak periods aligned precisely with other massive disruptions. On a single night in October of 1871, multiple catastrophic fires broke out simultaneously across the Great Lakes region. The Great Chicago Fire is famous, but on that exact same night, The Peshtigo fire in Wisconsin consumed over 1 million acres and took thousands of lives, becoming the most devastating wildfire in American history. Simultaneously, dozens of distinct fires leveled towns across Michigan. The decade immediately following these massive fires saw the absolute peak of orphan train placements. The fires had created massive regional displacement, burning local property deeds, church registries, and birth certificates, leaving a massive void into which thousands of untraceable children were systematically moved. During this exact same era, another strange phenomenon was occurring at World's Fairs and amusement parks. Premature infants were being displayed in glass incubators as public sideshow attractions. A man named Martin Cooney, whose medical credentials were highly questionable and who routinely changed his identity, ran these exhibits at Coney Island and various World's Fairs. Visitors paid a quarter to view rows of anonymous premature babies behind glass. Cooney claimed to have treated thousands of infants, yet the identities of these children and their parents were kept entirely secret, operating at a time when established hospitals refused to treat premature babies at all. Where did this endless supply of anonymous infants come from, and why did the public accept it without question? When you look at the entire picture, you are left with the children themselves, real human beings who rode those trains into total anonymity. Today, an estimated 2 to 3 million Americans are the direct descendants of orphan train riders, and most of them carry a permanent blank space in their family tree. The information was never recorded, or it was sealed away behind institutional walls that remain locked to this day. We can try to dismiss it all as the natural byproduct of 19th century poverty, bureaucratic sloppiness, or a series of unfortunate coincidences. But when you look at the missing records, the destroyed census, the parallel global programs, the timing of the catastrophic fires, and the total erasure of identity at every turn, it looks less like a series of accidents and more like a deliberate pattern. The question we are left with is not whether it happened, but why history has worked so incredibly hard to ensure it remains forgotten.